Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. At 7:07 a.m. on Saturday, December 4th, 2004, a call came into Gwinnett County Dispatch from a quiet cul-de-sac in Beaufort, Georgia. A child's voice, uncertain but not panicked, said something no 7-year-old should ever have to say. "I think my mommy's dead." The dispatcher kept her voice level. "Is she breathing?" "I don't know. She won't wake up." The responding unit logged arrival at 7:14 a.m. The scene was suburban calm. 2 stories of vinyl siding, a trim lawn, and a swing set out back. But inside the Corbin residence, second-floor master bedroom, law enforcement found a very different reality. 33-year-old Jennifer Corbin was lying face up on the bed, blood pooling beneath her head. A .38 caliber revolver rested next to her thigh. At first glance, it had all the trappings of a suicide. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, and one apparent gunshot wound to the head. But the bedroom was too pristine. No blood spatter where you'd expect it. The revolver was oddly placed, perpendicular to her body, almost too precisely aligned. Detectives on the scene made note. Nothing about this felt organic. Deputy Stephen LeMay, one of the first on site, made a brief call to his supervisor. His words were measured, but the implication was clear. "This is not clean. We're going to need the coroner and CID down here now." The victim's 2 sons, Dalton and Dylan, were found safe and unharmed in separate bedrooms. Jennifer's husband, Dr. Barton Corbin, a practicing cosmetic dentist, was notably absent. According to statements gathered later that morning, he'd stayed the night at his brother's house over an hour away. Homicide detectives began securing the scene for a full forensic workup. As they moved methodically through the room, they cataloged anomalies. No gunpowder residue on Jennifer's hands or face. The entry wound was at the back of the head, right side. A rare and awkward angle for self-infliction, especially for a right-handed woman. The revolver had no visible fingerprints, not even smudges. The pillow beneath her head was oddly undisturbed, considering the force of a close-contact gunshot wound. These weren't red flags. They were road flares. Coroner's arrival was logged at 9:02 a.m. Time of death was preliminarily placed between 1 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., a gap that would later prove critical. Jennifer's body was removed for post-mortem examination, and the room was sealed for a full forensic sweep. Deputy LeMay noted something else, almost in passing. Jennifer's robe was slightly open, the belt untied. It wasn't sexualized, just careless. Odd, given the overall orderliness of the scene. A female detective added, "This doesn't read like a woman who got into bed to die." A neighbor across the street reported lights still on in the master bedroom at 2:15 a.m. She thought it was strange for a Saturday, but assumed the couple was up late. She hadn't seen Barton Corbin that morning, or since the prior afternoon. A search warrant was drafted by 11:20 a.m., authorizing collection of digital devices, financial records, and any recent medical or prescription information from the home. While patrol officers quietly moved the children into temporary family care, detectives were already running Corbin's phone records. His last known call had pinged off a tower much closer to home than he'd claimed in his initial statement. By the afternoon, a team of 2 forensic technicians had finished processing the master bedroom. Blood pattern analysis confirmed the shot was delivered at close range, but the blood distribution didn't match a self-inflicted injury. The backsplash was lighter than expected. One senior tech muttered, "There should be more noise here." Downstairs, Jennifer's work laptop was recovered. Initial log history showed late-night email activity. The last file accessed, an unsent message titled Draft Custody Filing, time-stamped 12:48 a.m., just hours before she was pronounced dead. Detective Carolyn Mahoney, lead on the case, took a mental inventory. Married woman, kids, financially dependent, history of isolation, preparing to file custody paperwork, now dead. No signs of struggle, but no indicators of emotional breakdown either. Her summary was flat. That's not a woman giving up. That's a woman preparing to leave. The house, the neighborhood, even the weapon. All of it suggested something controlled. Clinical, not desperate. And the problem with control is, it always leaves a pattern. Jennifer Carroll Corbin was born in 1971 and raised in a conservative Baptist household in Georgia. By all accounts, she was steady, well-liked, and cautious. Her friends described her as the kind of person who didn't make trouble. She graduated with a degree in early childhood education, but never entered the profession full-time. Instead, she married young, at 23, to a man already carving a path toward financial and social stability. Dr. Barton Corbin, 4 years older, was finishing dental school when they met. He was already being described by instructors as driven, precise, confident. That confidence, sometimes mistaken for arrogance, had appeal. The relationship progressed quickly, and within months Jennifer moved in. They were married within a year. Those close to her would later admit they'd had concerns, but Jennifer rarely voiced any doubts. By the early 2000s, the couple lived in a large house in Beaufort, just outside Atlanta. They had 2 young sons. Barton ran a successful cosmetic dentistry practice, and Jennifer stayed home with the boys. To anyone observing from the outside, the Corbins were a suburban success story: country club memberships, holiday cards, clean lawns. But internal records later showed that not all was settled beneath that exterior. Jennifer had made multiple inquiries into marriage counseling services through her church starting in late 2002. Notes from one counselor's intake form, recovered later by investigators, included the phrases "feels emotionally neglected" and "he becomes cold when confronted." Between April and October 2004, Jennifer had logged multiple sessions with a private therapist. Those notes, subpoenaed post-mortem, referenced marital intimidation, digital surveillance by her spouse, and concerns about escalating emotional distance. According to the therapist's record dated September 29th, Jennifer said she was thinking about leaving, but scared of what that would mean for the kids. This line became critical as law enforcement tried to establish whether Jennifer had shown suicidal tendencies. The therapist, later interviewed formally, stated under oath, she never expressed suicidal ideation. She was focused on survival and next steps. Investigators now had context, and that context needed digital corroboration. Jennifer's personal laptop was transferred to the digital forensics unit of the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office. Analysts extracted deleted files, email exchanges, and browser history. One of the first key discoveries was an active webmail correspondence with a woman named Anita. The relationship, entirely digital, spanned several months and included emotionally intimate exchanges. In one message dated November 15th, Jennifer wrote, "I don't feel seen in this house. You hear me in ways I forgot I even needed." This wasn't a secret affair in the physical sense, but to Jennifer, it was the beginning of emotional independence. And that was likely a problem for someone who had spent a decade maintaining control of a carefully curated life. Investigators didn't draw conclusions, but the data suggested movement, psychological, emotional, and logistical, away from the marriage. That movement had timestamps, login trails, and a pattern of increasingly active late-night messaging. Separately, cell phone logs from Jennifer's carrier were processed. Between November 28th and December 3rd, she made 7 calls to a family law attorney specializing in custody disputes. The last call, at 2:42 p.m. on December 3rd, lasted 28 minutes. The attorney confirmed under subpoena that Jennifer had asked about temporary custody arrangements, emergency financial separation, and procedures for removing a spouse from joint accounts. Nothing in her digital or clinical profile pointed towards suicide, but it wasn't just what was there, it was what wasn't. No goodbye messages, no search history for methods or symptoms, no last-minute confessions to friends or family. She was planning an exit, not a final one. One senior analyst reviewing the email threads noted privately, "There's a clarity here. It's not despair. It's calculation, protection, resolve." In the forensic sequencing of violent deaths, psychological profiling plays a role, not just in evaluating the victim, but in understanding what kind of behavior the environment can support or enable. Jennifer Corbin had access to funds. She was literate in technology. She had a support network, though not loud, it existed. She had plans to move. She had minor debts, but nothing overwhelming. She wasn't in trouble, she was in transition, and transition is dangerous. In family-related homicide cases, the most statistically volatile period is within 2 weeks of a declared separation. Investigators reviewing this case in late December knew that detail intimately. What they didn't yet know was how tightly the timeline would compress around Jennifer's final 24 hours. But they were about to find out. The autopsy report for Jennifer Corbin was finalized 3 days after her death. Conducted by the Gwinnett County Medical Examiner's Office, the report was unambiguous. The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. The manner of death, however, was undetermined, a classification that often signals the presence of conflicting evidence. The bullet entered at the lower right occipital bone, near the base of the skull, with an upward and slightly leftward trajectory. It lodged against the interior wall of the cranium. This path was flagged immediately. Suicide by firearm, particularly among women, most commonly involves a temple shot or intraoral discharge. The angle here suggested a shot delivered from behind and slightly below. Anatomically awkward, if not impossible, for a self-inflicted wound in a reclining position. There was no evidence of a contact wound. The lack of stippling or soot deposits ruled out a close contact discharge, placing the muzzle at least 18 inches from the entry site. GSR swabs returned negative. Her hands were tested twice, once at the scene, once post-mortem. Nothing. Not even trace residue. Dr. Emily Hargrove, the attending forensic pathologist, noted in her report, absence of gunpowder residue does not categorically eliminate suicide, but in combination with trajectory and weapon placement, it raises significant questions. There were no defensive wounds on Jennifer's hands or arms, no bruising along the wrists, no torn fingernails. Toxicology showed trace levels of zolpidem, prescribed for insomnia, well within therapeutic range. No alcohol, no illegal substances. She was coherent and conscious when the shot was fired. The position of the revolver remained a problem. It had been found on the bed, approximately 10 inches from Jennifer's right hand, with the barrel pointed away from her body. Technicians confirmed the cylinder contained only one spent cartridge. The rest were unused. No fingerprints were recovered from the weapon, neither hers nor anyone else's. It had been wiped down. Ballistics tests later confirmed the revolver was functional, and the bullet removed from Jennifer's skull was consistent with the weapon found on scene. Ownership records traced the firearm back to a personal acquaintance of Barton Corbin's in Alabama. A friend, not reported stolen, not registered in Jennifer's name. Investigators obtained that detail quietly. They didn't release it to the press. Forensic analysts also re-examined the bed linens. Blood spatter was minimal, confined primarily to the pillow and a small arc above the headboard. There was no back spatter on the adjacent wall. A trained technician described the scene as too sterile for a headshot. The pillow beneath Jennifer's head was almost fully intact, with no tissue fragmentation, rare in cases of contact or near-contact discharge. A small but critical inconsistency was found beneath the mattress. When the bedding was removed for lab analysis, investigators located a partial indent consistent with a knee print, positioned adjacent to where Jennifer's head would have been. It was not her own. The size and angle suggested someone had braced themselves during the shot. It didn't prove anything, but it filled a gap. Investigators built a spatial recreation of the event using the scene's original photos, measurements, and dummy positioning. 3 attempts were run to simulate suicide under the physical constraints of the bed, pillow, and weapon type. In each test, the shot trajectory could not be duplicated without producing either close contact stippling or back spatter inconsistent with what was found. The lab summary was blunt. The physical evidence does not support a self-inflicted injury under these conditions. Parallel to the forensic testing, the CID team received a call from the family law attorney Jennifer had consulted 2 days before her death. After hearing of the incident, the attorney reached out proactively. Her notes, legally protected under privilege until released by the estate, showed Jennifer had discussed emergency protective orders and requested referrals for a secure location to stay with her children. The attorney described Jennifer's tone during the call as focused, organized, emotionally resolved. That wasn't desperation. That was preparation. One point that remained a lingering concern among the detectives was the complete absence of struggle. No furniture disturbed, no sign of forced compliance. The theory forming quietly among senior investigators was that Jennifer had either been unaware of the danger or had trusted the person in the room enough not to resist. If the shot had been unexpected, quick, and delivered from behind, it would explain the absence of defensive wounds. The knee indent supported that timing. Detective Carolyn Mahoney reviewed the sequence again late that week, marking each confirmed data point on a whiteboard in the basement office. Autopsy, trajectory inconsistent. Gun, no prints. Body, no residue. Scene, staged. Behavior, not suicidal. She stepped back and crossed her arms. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Jennifer Corbin didn't just die from a gunshot. She died during a transition. The very moment she tried to reclaim her life, digitally, legally, emotionally, was the moment her control vanished. And it wasn't the bullet that first silenced her. It was the illusion that she was safe. By mid-December 2004, less than 2 weeks after Jennifer Corbin's death, investigators had already exhausted the most immediate forensic leads: ballistics, digital evidence, autopsy analysis. But a shift occurred when a quiet lead emerged, not from forensics, but from memory. A name surfaced during a background trace: Dolly Hearn. The connection came through an internal query when Barton Corbin's name was run against archived case files in Richmond County. In 1990, a 22-year-old woman named Dolly Hearn had died from a single gunshot wound to the head in her apartment near Augusta. At the time, her death had been ruled a suicide. But the profile was troubling. Like Jennifer, Dolly had been young, educated, and reportedly seeking to end a relationship. Like Jennifer, she was found in her bedroom. And like Jennifer, the scene was initially described as neat, with the weapon positioned near the body. Back then, Barton Corbin had been her boyfriend. Investigators from Gwinnett County formally requested the original files from the 1990 case. What they received was minimal: basic photography, a brief ME report, and a summary of the original responding officer's impressions. Dolly's body had been found slumped next to her bed, with a bullet wound through the top of her skull. The pistol was lying on her lap. It had been her father who found her. When the case was reviewed by the coroner in 1990, the ruling had been suicide. No forced entry, no sign of struggle, one shot. But there was no gunpowder residue analysis on file. No full trajectory report. The weapon had not been fingerprinted. There had been no autopsy photos archived properly. The procedures in place at that time were significantly less robust than those used in Jennifer Corbin's case. What changed the direction of the current investigation was a specific detail buried in Dolly's father's original statement. He noted that the body looked moved and the weapon was cleaner than it should have been. At the time, it had been dismissed as grief. 14 years later, it became a data point. Gwinnett investigators arranged a formal interview with Dolly's family in Augusta. Her parents had never fully accepted the suicide ruling. They told detectives she had been preparing to move out, had a new job offer pending, and had reportedly broken up with her boyfriend just days prior. That boyfriend was Barton Corbin. The timeline of Dolly's death now drew new attention. June 1990, a single gunshot, clean scene, no note, no confirmed motive. It matched the Jennifer case in multiple operational points: victim profile, scene construction, method of injury, absence of clear suicide indicators. Alone, each element might fall within statistical variance. Together, they became a pattern. A pattern became a problem. Investigators moved carefully. They reviewed Barton's university records and housing logs from that year. He had been in Augusta the weekend of Dolly's death. He had no alibi for the window of time in which she was believed to have died. Witness statements were limited, but a neighbor recalled hearing a loud noise, then silence. The incident was never followed up. To confirm relevance, Gwinnett investigators brought in a retired forensic consultant from the GBI to review both cases side by side. His conclusion: the likelihood of two unrelated, self-inflicted gunshot wounds involving women tied to the same man, years apart, both ruled suicides despite conflicting forensic signals, was statistically low enough to reclassify one or both as highly suspicious. The team didn't reopen Dolly's case formally. They didn't need to, not yet. Instead, they prepared a timeline grid comparing both incidents. They matched dates, contacts, weapon types, trajectories, crime scene layouts. One square on the board showed a bullet path through the rear cranium. Another showed weapon wiped, no prints. A third read, victim planning departure. The conclusion wasn't declared publicly, but it was circulating internally. This wasn't the first time. Jennifer Corbin was last seen alive around 10:30 p.m. on December 3, 2004, when she kissed her youngest son goodnight and went back to her bedroom. What happened over the next several hours was never witnessed, but what was captured digitally would change the course of the investigation. The initial statement from Barton Corbin was brief and confident. He said he had left the family home earlier in the evening to stay overnight at his brother's house in Rome, Georgia, approximately 90 miles northwest of Beaufort. He claimed he didn't return to the house that night and had no contact with Jennifer after leaving. There were no text messages, no phone calls, no emails. But in digital forensics, silence can be suspicious. So can location data. On December 8th, investigators obtained a subpoena for Barton Corbin's cell phone records, including tower logs and ping data. The request covered a 24-hour period, from the evening of December 3rd through the morning of December 4th. When the tower reports came back, what they revealed wasn't dramatic, it was just specific. At 1:43 a.m., Barton's phone pinged off a tower located less than 2 miles from the Corbin residence. It was a brief signal, one that could have been easily overlooked. But in homicide investigation, location matters more than timing. And this timing aligned directly with the estimated time of death placed by the medical examiner. That ping wasn't supposed to be there. Detectives reviewed the tower path. Barton's phone had been in motion from the general direction of Rome earlier that night. He had left his brother's neighborhood at approximately 12:30 a.m., then moved southeast. There were no traffic cameras along the rural route, but the phone continued to register along a corridor of increasingly specific proximity until it was back in Beaufort. It stayed there for just under 35 minutes. Then another ping registered heading back north. By 4 a.m., the phone was once again near his brother's house. Barton never mentioned any detour. His statement indicated he left for Rome and stayed there through the night. He never mentioned being back in town. The data made something else clear. Between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m., Jennifer's laptop went idle. No movement, no keylog activity, no open files or background syncs. Her devices, once active with searches and messaging earlier that evening, went completely dark. When her son found her the next morning, rigor mortis had already begun. The medical examiner later refined her time of death to around 2 a.m., give or take 30 minutes. Now the tower data was in alignment with the timeline of death. That wasn't just a contradiction, that was movement. Detectives knew cell tower evidence had to be airtight. One weak connection, one poorly calibrated log, and a defense team could introduce doubt. So they brought in an independent forensic analyst from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to confirm. He reviewed the logs, tower spread, device ID, and signal strength records. His report read, "There is no plausible explanation for this device registering on the Beaufort Tower at 1:43 a.m., unless the subject was within a 3-mile radius. The phone was in Beaufort during the time frame in question." Barton's brother was interviewed again. He admitted that Barton had arrived late, possibly around 4 a.m., but said he hadn't checked the clock and assumed it was earlier. No surveillance cameras were available in the neighborhood, and no smart home tech existed to verify entry or exit. But Barton's alibi had started to collapse under digital pressure. At this stage, investigators had 3 pillars: scene inconsistency, a suspicious trajectory, and now digital movement. It wasn't enough for a warrant, but it was enough to shift the tone of the case, from inquiry to focus. The data didn't lie. The human explanations around it, however, were starting to fray. In domestic homicide cases, timing is often the only thing separating guilt from narrative. The closer someone is to the moment of death, geographically, emotionally, logistically, the harder it becomes to detach them. Barton wasn't just near Jennifer that night. He was exactly where he said he wasn't. In any homicide case involving a firearm, the gun is more than a weapon. It's a signature. Its make, origin, and handling history all speak louder than the barrel ever could. When detectives recovered the .38 caliber revolver from Jennifer Corbin's bedroom on December 4, 2004, they logged it as standard evidence. But it wouldn't stay standard for long. At first glance, the revolver appeared generic. No serial defacement, no custom parts, no unusual modifications. But one issue stood out immediately. It wasn't registered to anyone in the Corbin household. The manufacturer confirmed it was a Taurus model produced in 1992. Sales records traced the original purchase to a private dealer in Troy, Alabama. That detail on its own wasn't suspicious, but paired with Barton Corbin's known travel pattern, it became relevant. Investigators submitted a formal query through the National Tracing Center. Within a week, they received confirmation. The last documented owner of the weapon was Richard Wilson, a former college acquaintance of Barton's. Wilson, a recreational hunter with no criminal record, still lived in Troy. When contacted, he cooperated fully. According to Wilson, Barton had visited him unexpectedly in late November 2004. They'd shared a meal, talked briefly, and Barton had asked if he still had that old backup revolver. Wilson admitted he gave it to him. No paperwork, just a friend handing off a forgotten gun. He said Barton told him it was for protection during a trip, nothing more. Wilson hadn't seen or heard from him since. Wilson's recollection was corroborated by a credit card charge showing Barton purchased gas in Troy on the same day. No legal violation had occurred in the transfer, but the timing, just days before Jennifer's death, was critical. The .38 was now more than a weapon. It was traceable. The chain of custody now included the suspect. Ballistics tests confirmed the bullet retrieved from Jennifer Corbin's skull matched the rifling pattern of the Taurus revolver recovered on her bed. The weapon's cylinder contained 5 live rounds and 1 spent casing. The firing pin impression was clean. No signs of malfunction. More importantly, forensic testing concluded that the revolver had been wiped of fingerprints. This aligned with scene observations from the original responders. No latent prints, no smudges, just an unusually clean firearm beside a dead woman who had no documented history of owning or using guns. Investigators checked Jennifer's digital footprint. No recent searches on firearm use. No license, no training, no mentions in emails or texts. Friends interviewed said she was uncomfortable around weapons and never kept one in the house. The question was no longer just how Jennifer died. It was how the gun got there. Why she would use a weapon she didn't own, didn't know, and hadn't touched before. The theory that she had obtained the weapon herself lost traction quickly. She'd been in contact with an attorney, planning separation and custody actions. She was focused on logistics, not threats. There was no note, no withdrawal of funds, no pattern of despair. The gun, clean and unregistered to her, simply didn't fit. The weapon wasn't a suicide tool, it was a plant. By late December, the investigative team outlined their internal theory. The gun had been sourced out of state through a personal contact to reduce traceability. It had been introduced into the crime scene deliberately. It was staged as part of a suicide narrative, but the evidence contradicted that narrative at every turn. Forensic analysis had ruled out close-range self-infliction. The angle of the wound was inconsistent. The presence of a wiped gun with no digital or behavioral trail behind it collapsed the plausibility of suicide completely. The revolver didn't just link to Barton Corbin's social circle, it placed intent in his timeline. A detail often missed in such cases is how quietly premeditation can hide behind convenience. A trip to visit a friend, a casual request, a weapon stored in a drawer for a decade. And then, within days, a woman dies in her own bed, with no defensive wounds and no reason to die by her own hand. That level of planning isn't spontaneous, it's structured. And in criminal investigations, structure always leaves residue. By late December 2004, the case against Barton Corbin was no longer circumstantial. It was coordinated. The forensic inconsistencies, the cell tower data, the out-of-state weapon traced back to his hand, and the psychological profile of a victim preparing for separation, each element reinforced a narrative investigators could no longer ignore. But they needed to close the loop with precision. The decision to move toward an arrest wasn't immediate. Prosecutors were cautious. In Georgia, securing a conviction in a no-witness homicide, especially one initially staged as a suicide, requires more than motive and suspicion. It requires alignment between evidence, timeline, and behavior. District Attorney Danny Porter met with detectives to review the full case file. The meeting lasted over 4 hours. Porter asked one question near the end. Can we account for everything within a margin of error that a defense team can explain away? The answer was yes. Not perfectly, but closely enough. Jennifer Corbin's autopsy had ruled out self-infliction based on trajectory, residue, and wound path. The gun was sourced, traced, and had no forensic link to her. Her psychological profile and digital behavior were incompatible with suicidal ideation. Barton's movements contradicted his alibi, confirmed by tower triangulation and his own brother's incomplete statement. The gun was delivered from an old friend under pretenses that no longer held. And now they had history. The Dolly Hearn case, once dismissed as a tragic anomaly, had become a comparative foundation. Investigators wouldn't charge Barton in Dolly's death, not yet, but it provided what prosecutors called behavioral precedent. Two women, both romantically involved with Barton, both found dead from gunshot wounds to the head, both with staged elements, both labeled suicide despite evidence to the contrary. This was enough for probable cause. On December 22, 2004, Barton Corbin was arrested at his brother's home. The warrant was served quietly. He was compliant. He offered no statement and requested counsel immediately. His sons were not present during the arrest. Law enforcement took steps to ensure the scene remained controlled and non-disruptive. From a procedural standpoint, it was a clean takedown. What came next was the slow, deliberate construction of a prosecutorial strategy. The state did not rush to trial. Investigators continued gathering supplemental evidence in the weeks that followed. Additional witnesses were re-interviewed, including neighbors, friends, and legal professionals Jennifer had contacted. Among those interviews, one stood out, her family law attorney. She confirmed that Jennifer had planned to file an emergency motion for separation the following Monday. She had also inquired about changing the locks and freezing joint bank accounts. The attorney described Jennifer's tone as calm, factual, and forward-focused. There was no distress, no breakdown, no hint of withdrawal. She was moving, not collapsing. That testimony didn't just reinforce the timeline, it disarmed any lingering doubts. The prosecution team built their timeline to the minute. Jennifer's last known digital activity, 12:48 a.m. Barton's cell ping, 1:43 a.m. Estimated time of death, between 1:30 and 2 a.m. Return ping, around 4 a.m. His car was never seen, but his phone was. The state didn't need a witness. They had the pattern. They also had motive. During the weeks prior to the murder, Jennifer had confronted Barton about his extramarital affairs. He'd grown distant, angry. Family and friends confirmed the relationship was unraveling. When Jennifer initiated conversations about divorce and custody, his behavior became erratic. The control he had held for over a decade, financial, emotional, reputational, was slipping. And the moment he lost control was the moment she died. In the spring of 2005, the state convened a grand jury. The evidence was presented over 3 days. Barton was indicted for the murder of Jennifer Corbin. What made this case different from others was how quietly it had unfolded in the beginning. No spectacle, no chase, just a clean suburban house, a staged scene, and a digital trail that refused to vanish. The arrest didn't bring closure, not yet, but it brought momentum. And in homicide work, momentum is sometimes the only way to break a silence that's been engineered to hold. On September 15, 2006, nearly 2 years after Jennifer Corbin was found dead in her suburban bedroom, Barton Corbin stood in a courtroom and entered a guilty plea. He admitted, without condition, to the murders of 2 women, his wife Jennifer and his former girlfriend Dolly Hearn. There was no trial, no cross-examinations, no jury deliberation. Corbin accepted 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each homicide, without the possibility of parole. The state agreed to forgo the death penalty in exchange for a full admission of guilt. For prosecutors, it was a trade-off that spared both families years of legal trauma. For the victims' loved ones, it was closure, but not peace. In court, the facts were read into record plainly. Jennifer Corbin, 33 years old, had been in the process of separating from her husband when she was shot at close range in her home. The crime scene had been deliberately staged to resemble suicide. The forensic evidence, however, trajectory, lack of residue, and gun placement, overwhelmed the narrative. Coupled with digital evidence, weapon sourcing, and Barton's movement patterns that night, the conclusion was inescapable. The plea deal included a formal acknowledgement of Barton's role in the 1990 death of Dolly Hearn, whose case had remained closed under the label of suicide for over a decade. Although no separate trial was pursued for Dolly's case, the court accepted his admission as part of the plea. Her parents, seated quietly in the back of the room that day, finally received what they had known all along, that Dolly didn't take her own life. The sentence was life, twice over. But it didn't reverse anything. Jennifer's parents were present during the proceedings. In a written impact statement read aloud by the prosecutor, her mother described the void left behind, not just the absence of a daughter, but the lifelong questions her sons would carry. Dalton and Dylan were placed in the care of extended family after Jennifer's death. They were still children when their father was sentenced for murdering their mother. There were no cameras in the courtroom, no dramatic outbursts. The moment passed as many high-profile pleas do, quiet, procedural, final. In the aftermath, there were no policy shifts, no sweeping reforms. But law enforcement in Georgia began re-examining certain suicide rulings in domestic settings with renewed scrutiny. Internal memos circulated within multiple sheriff's departments, instructing investigators to treat any suicide involving a spouse under contentious separation as potentially staged until proven otherwise. The Corbin case, though tragic, exposed something law enforcement often underestimated: how silence, planning, and familiarity could be used as tools to disguise homicide. The absence of forced entry, the absence of defensive wounds, the use of a weapon sourced through social connections. These are not gaps in evidence. They are tactics. This case wasn't about chaos. It was about control. And that's what made it harder to detect and harder to accept. Jennifer Corbin wasn't reckless. She wasn't impulsive. In her final days, she was deliberate. She sought legal help. She made custody plans. She reconnected with people who gave her support. What she didn't have was time or protection from someone who saw her independence as a threat. Dolly Hearn was young, hopeful, on the verge of moving forward with her life. She died alone, found by her father, while the man responsible vanished back into the world unnoticed. Her case was shelved for 14 years, not out of malice, but out of limited tools and missed connections. Barton Corbin used that time to build a respected life, a successful career, and a public image that concealed what he had already done once and was willing to do again. There are no easy resolutions in stories like this. A guilty plea ends the legal process, but it doesn't fix what was broken. What it does provide at its best is a permanent record, a refusal to let appearances bury the truth. 2 women died in bedrooms that should have been safe. Their cases remind us that violence in intimate spaces often comes dressed in routine, that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who never raise their voice, never break a window, never leave a bruise. It's not always rage that ends a life. Sometimes it's the cold, calculated certainty that no one will ask the right questions, but this time, they did. Sometimes justice doesn't come with a dramatic reveal. It comes with the quiet persistence of evidence, the strength of those left behind, and the refusal to believe what doesn't make sense. If you've followed Jennifer and Dolly's stories this far, then you know. Appearances can lie, but patterns do not. As someone who's walked you through this case, I hope one takeaway is this: pay attention, listen to what feels wrong, advocate for those who can't. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did this story resonate with you? Do you believe more cases like this go unnoticed? Let me know where you're watching from, or if something in this case reminded you of someone you know. If you didn't like this video, tell me why. Let's talk about it. And if this story moved you, even just a little, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more true stories to light, and maybe one day it might help someone speak up before it's too late.